Jim, thanks very much for being in the circle with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Tell me where you grew up and also who were your heroes when you were young?
I grew up in a small town in southeastern Minnesota called Northfield, which is where Carleton and St. Olaf are located. And so that was my hometown. Grew up there. My folks eventually both worked at Carleton. My dad in the shop as a painter and my mom in the library as an assistant. One of the people who was really influential for me early on was a professor at Carleton College called Paul Wellstone, who later went on to become a United States Senator. And one of the things he said in one of the classes I took from him was, there's a bunch of students kind of all lamenting how difficult it is to make change in the world and kind of wringing their hands a little bit. And he turned to our class and said, if the people in this room can't change the world, who can? And that always resonated with me and helped me begin to think about the idea that I could help try to change some part of the world for the better.
Take me through the evolution from not sure I'm going to go to college to Carleton.
Yeah. Well, college has kind of a special place in our family. My parents first met as teenagers and they fell in love, and before they knew it, my mom got pregnant and they decided to drop out of high school and start their family and start their life. And they raised 5 kids. My oldest brother, who was the first person in the whole extended family to ever go to college, had a really good job at the canning factory the next town over in Faribault, a place called Crown Cork and Seal. And in those days, if you had a pretty good job, people thought it'd be a little crazy to leave it to go to college. But he did that, and I think that was something my parents always dreamed of and hoped for their son and then ultimately for the rest of the siblings. At one point I thought maybe I wanted to be an elected official, so I had that in my mind for a little bit. And I was always drawn to sort of the idea of public policy and how laws and things can affect society. It was interesting to see Paul Wellstone go from being, a pretty obscure professor at a small school to win an election to the United States Senate. And I think in many ways that inspired a lot of us to say, boy, it is actually possible for a regular citizen to get involved in government and actually get elected. But ultimately I decided that, that I'd rather work in the nonprofit sector and serve others through that means. One of the challenges, I think, of growing up in a low-income family is, first, you got to figure out how to get to college. And as we talked about, I had a little bit of guidance, a little bit of a path from my siblings. But when I was finishing college, I didn't know how to go get a job. And so I saw some of my friends getting jobs at top consulting firms, and they seemed to just kind of know what to do, and I didn't quite know what to do. I applied for a couple things and nothing came through. And so I had some friends that had just moved to Washington, D.C. Paul Wellstone had just gotten elected. And so I thought, well, I guess I'll go move out to Washington, D.C. and see what's out there for me, and started interning on Capitol Hill for Paul Wellstone. Of course, there was no pay, so I was washing dishes at a pizza place for $5 an hour. So my transition into the work world was also kind of rough, and you see that with a lot of low-income students where they just don't have the social network. They don't have parents who can help them get the proper summer internship and guide them in the workforce.
How did you get the idea for College Possible?
I ended up going to the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, where I was working on a degree in public policy and public administration. And I had gone there with a different idea in mind, a different kind of organization I thought I could start. And so I was kind of working on that and taking classes and thinking about it. And I actually really had an epiphany one day. I was sitting in a class, in a seminar on affordable housing, which is the other thing which related to housing. And it just occurred to me, this idea popped into my head. What if I created an organization that would help students like I once was prepare for the SAT exam and figure out how to apply to college and get financial aid and get admitted to college. And it came to me really like an epiphany, and I went home that night and I wrote in my journal. I've kept a journal my whole life, and I still have that entry where I just felt this moment of peace, like I finally knew what I should do. And now that I look back on it, and I've read a little bit about the idea of is there really such a thing as an epiphany? And really it was born out of my whole experience. I'd probably had the seeds of this planted, through my mom and dad's dreams for their children, to see my older siblings all get to go to college. Gave me such a wonderful vantage point on the world, because I could see my parents have really difficult lives, physically demanding lives. You know, when they retired, their bodies were broken and really exhausted. And then I had, on the other hand, my siblings who all have had these remarkable lives. A sister who's a medical doctor and a brother who's a civil engineer. And so I had that vantage point on the world. And so I think all of that came together when I was at the Kennedy School to give me the nugget of this idea.